Hello, everyone. Good morning to those of you who are joining from Switzerland and from probably other European countries. And good afternoon to those of you joining from Bishkek and other Central Asian states. Welcome to the session of Social Effects of Migration and Remittances. My name is Nurgul Tilenbaeva, and I teach at the American University in Central Asia. So first of all, I would like to explain some technicalities. We have 2 language channels in Zoom. So if you click on interpretation, you can choose the language that you want to have for listening to the presentation. So it could be either English or Russian. The session is recorded and it will be available in the future on the website of LiK in Kyrgyzstan. How the organization is the following is that each presentation or each slot will have 30 minutes, out of which 20 minutes will be given for a presentation and roughly 10 minutes for a discussion. When there are 5 minutes remaining for the presentation itself, I will let the speakers know by writing in the chat, or maybe I will start waving and making some sounds. And basically, so today, about today's topic, migration, as we know, is a frequent phenomenon in developing countries across the world. Growth in the number of international migrants has been robust over the last 2 decades, reaching 281 million people living outside their country of origin in 2020. It's up from 173 million in 2000 and 221 million in 2010. Currently, international migrants represent about 3.6% of the world's population. For a sending country, migration and the resulting remittances may lead to increased incomes and poverty reduction, and improved health and educational outcomes and promote economic development. Yet, however, these gains might come at substantial social costs to the migrants and their families. And today we will be listening to a really interesting 3 research papers on the social effects of migration and remittances. The first is Aleksandra Filatova with her work entitled Transnational Functions of Kyrgyz Communities in Moscow. Aleksandra offers rich research background. In her research, she focuses on group culture, social movements, transnational communities. In her research, she uses comparative methods, visual language to define the language of groups, group culture and social movements, art for understanding social processes, and decolonizing discourse. And she has a focus on South-South experience sharing. So I give the floor to Aleksandra. Please, you may start sharing your screen.
Okay, thank you so much. So now I think you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see.
Yes?
Yes, if you can just maximize as you did before. If you can put the slideshow, I think.
You know, it's some problem. I think now you can see this, yes?
I can see it. The only thing, maybe if you click on view and then make it large.
Okay.
This is also fine. Okay.
Okay, great. So my title of this work is Transnational Functions of Kyrgyz Communities in Moscow. To understand the design and logic of the study, I will touch upon on positionality a little. This research has several institutional and disciplinary frameworks and logic. Firstly, it was done in the framework of writing master thesis in the politics economics philosophy program in Higher School of Economics in Moscow. Secondly, I'm a Kyrgyzstani myself who has lived outside of the country for more than 10 years. And my work in research institutes and activists work in Kyrgyz community and state organization is related to community building and empowering of communities. And I see it as a contribution to building a knowledge migrant about migrants, Kyrgyzstani about Kyrgyzstanis. In addition, the result of this study formed the basis for a policy paper and recommendation for the Office of the Kyrgyz State Migration Agency in Moscow, because the study have been done in 2019. It was still exist. So after the policy reform, now it's under the embassy patronage. So during this time, it was actively involved in protecting the rights of labor migrants in Moscow, and I collected I have been in touch of this agency when I have been in Moscow. So I collected the data through the semi-structured interviews with 7 leaders of Kyrgyz communities in Moscow, through observation of community meetings and events organized by diaspora, like national concerts, sports competition, and culture events. My participation in the work of the State Migration Service and voluntary activity in Kyrgyz Club also contributed to my research. Next slide. Yes, no. Previous one. No, I think I lost one, but okay. So organizations, what I choose to be in focus of this study, have different legal statuses. Some of them have been registered as NGOs, have formal rules established by members. As I told you before, I interviewed leaders of 7 communities. 3 of them are countrymen and tribal organizations, 2 institutional diasporas, and I will touch in a second why I group them like this. And third are umbrella organizations that members not persons but communities themselves. So for those who are not familiar with Kyrgyzstan, the naming of countrymen and tribal organization is related to geographical naming. One of the communities in focus is Issyk unites compatriots from the Issyk region. Another Kokjangak unites compatriots from town with the same naming. Members of these communities usually knew each other before they came to Moscow. So the next type of organization, it's institutional diaspora. By Warszawa and Rocheva, diaspora organization is defined by the fact that it unites people who didn't know each other before they met in the country, in the host country, like in Moscow, for example, because I examined community only in Moscow. And in our case, it's Kyrgyz Berendiki. It's a Kyrgyz unit in translation, what has classical diaspora characteristic, whose members include different age groups and social statuses, And the International Association of Entrepreneurs, I call them white collars union, because members mainly entrepreneurs and small business owners. So, and the third type of communities is umbrella organizations, and it's unite communities. So communities is a unit of membership. These organizations position themselves as a representative of all Kyrgyzstani under one brand. So Kyrgyz Congress unites communities all around Russia, and Kyrgyz Cooperation Center communities in Moscow. To be true, I collected more data than I include in work and presentation today, because we have some focus on remittances. Some results what I received, the types of communities are defined by the members, and the strategies toward the Kyrgyz Republic and Russian Federation. It is also defined by the level and types of communication, and functions of the functions of them, of course, overlapping by by type of the communities, but compatriot communities focus mainly on life and activities in Kyrgyzstan, and umbrella organizations focus mainly on life and activities in Moscow. Institutional diaspora organizations have the greatest characteristic of transnational communities and perform functions in Kyrgyzstan and Russia equally. So to give you more structural example, I compare the role of organizations in political participation, infrastructural projects, and the role in knowledge sharing. In Kyrgyzstan, country-made organizations play a significant role in participation in local elections. They participate in joint projects with UNDP and the government to repair the bridges or build football field during the COVID times. They supported the villages and towns. Institutional diaspora organizations participate in parliamentary elections and conducting business trainings in Kyrgyzstan. So they share their success and experience. So umbrella organizations almost absent in Kyrgyz political and public life, but they're main players in Moscow. So the members of Russian, like this umbrella organizations, they members of the Russian political parties and represent diaspora in official meetings and city councils. In crisis, authorities contact them first. So traditional diaspora organizations also participate in city council meetings or represent Kyrgyzstanis in structures like the Moscow House of Nationalities. Additionally, there's like ethnic business establishers. They usually like infrastructural centers of communities. So they run trainings about legalization and so on. So country-made communities mainly organize cultural events which give people a sense of belonging. So they're first compatriots in difficult situation. But to add more, like to our focus of our discussion today. We know that the social remittances, it's usually like classify that this is a knowledge, technology, cultural practices. But apart from this, what the difference, what the community play, and like the particular one person, one migrant. So the community, it's like they like play more sustainable and more extensive effect of the like social remittances. So to be in two worlds as a group gave opportunity to adapt faster and to support change in both worlds, like in Kyrgyzstan and in Moscow, in my case. Like we know that communities help to like to they help to mobilize the community. Like if the community existed, they help to like to mobilize in crisis. So I give the example during the pandemic. So the current research what I used to work have been done in spring of this year, and it was about culture infrastructure in Kyrgyzstan. But surprisingly, we found out that like in Cholponata in Iskul, we have a museum what have been done some cultural connections with one Kyrgyz. So Kyrgyz who live in Van in Turkey. So and during the pandemic, they supported they supported the community in Kyrgyzstan. So and we have a lot of examples that during the crisis. Of pandemic crisis, the communities place communities abroad place a huge impact on supporting the communities inside of Kyrgyzstan. So and another another example. So the community itself, they like supported the bigger projects, like they built the bridges, for example, as I give from Kokchangab community, or they support the local local infrastructural projects, and they play like the role of the partner for international organizations and government infrastructural projects. So, and also we have example of now some communities what have been built abroad, they come in Kyrgyzstan and establish their businesses here as a community because they already have connections between each other. For example, like I know the several examples that the community from Moscow built the building here in Bishkek or Osh, and like a business property. So this is several examples why why it's important to talk about the communities. Communities are the players in social remittances. So, and I think it's my last slide. So if you have questions or suggestions about this research, so I will be more than happy to receive them. So, and I will keep my extra 5 minutes for the questions or for discussion. So thank you so much for the attention.
Thank you very much, Aleksandra, for a very interesting presentation. So we open the floor to questions. If you want to ask a question, you can either raise your hand in Zoom, you can raise your physical hand, or you can just write in the chat. That's also fine. So probably in the meantime, I don't think there are any questions. So I have a question. Aleksandra, you were mentioning at the beginning that you interviewed several organizations, several people from these organizations. I think you mentioned something like 83, if I'm not mistaken. So
you're mistaken. It was 7 people. Seven organizations and 7
organizations.
Yes.
Okay, so maybe, sorry. Now I was curious, how was the sampling done? Like what procedure did you use to sample those organizations?
It's actually a good question, because the diaspora organizations, they're usually not really open to like people who coming from the side. It's not every time like easy to assess, like to be inside of the like discussion, to be inside of the community, and especially, yes, I'm Kyrgyzstani, but I'm ethnically Russian. So it's to be in Moscow, you associate that you're like Russian in Russia. It's not every time like accepted, you accepted like a part of Kyrgyzstani community. So, but I entered the field through the participation of the different cultural events. So I have been in Moscow 2 years. So that's why, so I established this relationship during these 2 years. So I participated Kokboru, for example, first tournament of Kokboru, like Akalpak Day, and many other events what have been organized by communities and embassy. So, and when I so came up like with during this like first year, so I realized that this community like different in shape and functions and so on. So then the umbrella organization, the obvious is just 2 of them. So so that's why it's come easily. So the classical diaspora organizations was easy to assess too, because like they open for communication, they trying like to promote Kyrgyz culture and like to establish the relationships. So it was easy also. The only like the countrymen organizations, so communities, it was like it's a lot of them. So and so I choose some of them where there was leaders was women, because it was good for representation too, to see the different perspective. And so, for example, a secure community leader of this community is woman. I'm sorry. And in entrepreneur organization, like it's also a leader is woman. So 2 out of 7 communities, like 2 out of 7 interviewee women. So and also I choose these communities because they represent the different regions of Kyrgyzstan. So I tried to capture like the big picture, like because I just entered to this field, and now I can build on this research to make more detailed projects in the future.
Thank you very much, Aleksandra. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes, Rémi, please, if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Aleksandra. Very, very interesting. I'm wondering, actually, I really don't know how, you know, the diaspora organizations are framed in this context. I know that, for instance, in the US, you have some organizations, mostly with Mexico, that are actually trying to pool remittances, meaning that remittances doesn't stay as within household decision, but then it's something like of a community decision. So within the migrants, there will be a kind of insurance setting in which, you know, they pool their remittances to go to the most needed people back home, and then they get a kind of insurance that if it comes to them, they will also benefit from the remittances. They call that a Polanyian, you know, from the Karl Polanyi economist, a Polanyian type of remittances, which I haven't heard much about except in this case, but I'm wondering because the diaspora is really well framed, I guess, in the Kyrgyz diaspora in Russia. So maybe you have something similar.
So, you know, I didn't find some similar things, but of course, these countrymen communities, organizations, they have some fund to support each members in critical situation, because they are first who react on the crisis situation, because they have all mainly knew each other before they came to Moscow, and they knew each other because they are from the same city or town. Now I live in Lebanon, so, and actually your example, it's work now in Lebanon during the crisis, because it's huge, it's huge economical crisis, and Lebanese diaspora, of course, it's all older than Kyrgyz diaspora, but I see the similar mechanisms, as you told, that in this huge crisis, the community of, for example, Lebanese who from the same village, as the same like in Kyrgyz people who from the same village, they support the poorest in the village, for example, in this huge situation when they all become the poor, like this. And so, but some Kyrgyz communities, they have the instruments, as we told, the Chornaya Kassa on Russian, when they they have some fund. I can tell that it's not financial security, but small fund what can be used in the critical situation.
Thank you very much to Aleksandra for the answer and to Rémi for the great question. Are there any other questions from the audience? You can either write in the chat or you can just raise your hand or start speaking immediately. So I suppose not, then let's move to the second presentation. Thank you very much, Aleksandra. So the second presentation is by Rémi Viné with the topic with his research, Tajikistan, Remittances, Expenditures, and the Family Left Behind. We are kind of ex-colleagues with Rémi, so I'm very happy to see him here. Rémi is a postdoc at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva in Switzerland, working on education, labor market, and migration issues. He did his PhD in migration economics and remittances. In the 3 papers composing his PhD thesis, Rémi deals with issues related to family reunification, remittances, and households' consumption, and the pricing of remittances. They all try to raise curiosity in topics or contexts that have been relatively neglected so far. So the floor is yours, and yes.
Okay, can you all see the slides?
Yes.
Is it fine?
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Nurgul. Thank you to the organizers for this lovely conference. I'm really sorry I don't have this fantastic background. I couldn't manage to, but be sure that I'm really impressed by this landscape. So yeah, this paper is about the impact of remittances on the consumption of the family back home, and I'm really keen in hearing from you in terms of feedback you have, what are the different contexts, etc., that I might be quite ignorant about. So the research question is pretty simple. There are remittances, and I want to see whether remittances are spent differently than local income, and how so, basically, for the family left behind. Just a quick context that you know better than I. In this area where Russia is, and Kazakhstan somehow, but Russia is the gravity center of the diaspora and sending remittances to Central Asian countries, there seemed to be a link, but that doesn't mean there is any causality, but there seemed to be a link between the share of remittances or the dependency on remittances and the wealth of the country. So Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan are the most dependent on remittances, and on the other hand, these are the countries that have the lowest GDP per capita in the region. So this is a really macro perspective, but then I'm especially interested into the micro, as you will see. This question is quite well researched question, because it has been asked in a lot of settings, in a lot of different analysis, such as it can be in macro perspective, it can be in micro, and within the micro you really have many papers in different contexts, like mostly in Latin America, in Sub-Saharan Africa, in Southeast Asia. Central Asia is a bit less developed in terms of the research about that, but you do have some papers in Kyrgyzstan, in Tajikistan, etc. But I do believe that there is a bit of a blind spot there, because especially Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan are super dependent on remittances, and I think very important to better understand what it leads to and what it means. All right, so as I was mentioning, I'm interested into the micro perspective, so I will use survey data, and I simply frame the question in the working laser model, which is convenient because it's pretty simple, and it also allows to get some interesting shapes of the spending of each household, the angle curves. I use the panel. I have 3 waves of data, so I can benefit from using the panel, and therefore look at within household how the changes in terms of consumption shares are going with and without remittances. There is some heterogeneity that is due to the fact that the migration decision, and hence the remittance decision, might be related to the household conditions, so there might be some reverse causality. And in any case, in the survey data, when people are asked how much do you remit, there are some measurement errors. So for these 2 reasons, instruments are a good tool. And households in the country, they might select themselves for migration. Typically, in a developing country, migration tends not to be performed by the poorest families, but by the poorest households, and no by the richest. So it's rather people who are slightly more educated and slightly richer than the average, who are having migrants in their family. And what I see in the data is basically the only share of goods that is increased with remittances is the share of what I call the secondary goods, which might also be understood as conspicuous goods in some aspects. There are some heterogeneity, meaning that the richest households are sometimes spending more in education, and the poorest households are spending more in health. The poorest households who have migrants and hence who have remitters, right? So there might be also an emergency component of remittances for the poorest households with migrants, while for the richer households, there might be an investment in the human capital for the longer run. But for all of them, the share of secondary goods is increasing. So these are the key results. Just to give a bit of the context, I have 3 waves of data all over the country: 2007, 2009, 2011. There is some variation across urban and rural areas, and I keep track of a bit more than 100 households. So as I was mentioning, who is a migrant in Tajikistan? Usually it's a man who is in the late 20s, rather educated, and I think it's interesting, was or at least indicated that he or she was inactive before migration. Russia is clearly the destination for the migration, and migration is rather temporary. It's rather short, 2 years, 3 years, as compared to other types of migration in other countries. This is quite a short migration, and most of the households are sending remittances. Then when we compare families with and without migrants in terms of their, or with and without remitters in terms of their expenditures, food expenditures in etc., it doesn't seem to be very different across households. So that's something that is, I think, quite important to keep in mind, meaning that in this aspect, the households are comparable. What I do is I split expenditures. I look at different categories, and what is important is I try to split the non-durable goods. I have food, some non-durable goods, energy, education, health, communication, but then, and this is fundamentally the core essence of the paper, is within the goods, you do have goods that are essential, that are really basic, the simple clothing, etc. And you have some goods that are secondary, like some magazines, it can be travel expenses, etc., etc. And by travel, I don't mean commuting. Commuting are in the basic, but then you have travel for vacation, etc. So then you do have, like, I think, a split between these goods, and that is what I'm checking here. And we can understand that the secondary goods are not the same than the basic goods in terms of behavior. One of them might be more in terms of thwarting poverty, and the other one is more in terms of conspicuousness, potentially. How do I separate? Because I'm pretty ignorant about the context. So I separate once just with my own subjectivity, reading different papers, etc. But then I also separate using the PCA, the principal component analysis, so that I use unsupervised learning to make sure that there is no subjectivity in this ranking, and the items within the non-durables that are catching at least 1/4 of the variance within the first component, I consider them as basic goods because they are the most important ones. All right. Yeah, maybe I can show you the consumption shares. You can see these are all the categories, the basic PCA and secondary PCA to be compared with these ones. You can see that we have the 3 years, right? 2007 up to 2011. And fundamentally what we see, and this is somehow interesting, is most of the consumptions are stable over time. And there is a shift from food, which occupied much more of the spending before, like 90% for lots of households, towards energy. People are spending more in energy now than, in 2011 than in 2007. All right. So the working and leather model is pretty classic. I add this component. So we have E, which is the expenditure, right? We have the controls. And what is nice in the working leather model is that it allows to get some non-linearity of the angle curve. So we can say whether the angle curve is convex or not. And be aware that the C here is the consumption shares, right? It's the consumption over the expenditures. So technically, this will be the coefficient for the linearity of the angle curve, not the omega. Okay. And since I had remittances, and my hypothesis is that remittances and local income are different, I just had this component here, and so I will be interested into the gamma. So if gamma is significant, that means that there is a difference in the spending in terms of shares across households, right? Since I have a panel, I can also I can benefit from the panel structure and have time fixed effects, and especially household fixed effect. The lambda is the household fixed effect, so that I really look at what is within the household in terms of the changes in spending. So I will apply this specification for all the consumption categories that I mentioned before. And since I have exactly the same controls, I don't need to have a seemingly unrelated regression model. So it's a very simple model. If I use this estimation as such, so naive fixed effects, because I do not deal with endogeneity, I do not question selection, etc. This is what I get. I have controls here, obviously. So I understand that my remittances are clearly endogenous, so the estimation of these coefficients for the first 9 are not really useful. But what I can be already interested in are the second and third lines, right? Sorry, the second, the third, and the fourth, actually. So you can see that the constant for food is occupying almost 1 in terms. It's a linear average, right? So, but basically, food is clearly the holding the lion's share, food and then energy, while the other ones are actually very small in terms of total amount of consumption. And what we see is there is a different sign for food than for most of other shares of consumption, except for communication, because the food has a concave pattern. So the richer I am, the less I will spend my extra sum money in food, while for the other ones, this is the opposite. And the most convex is actually education, right? Okay. Now we have to question the endogeneity of remittances, and I come up with 2 instruments that were used in this literature in actually this very context in Tajikistan. I have 2 instruments. One is for the pull and the other one is for the push. So for the push, I look at, I take an instrument within the data, within the household, which is the number of adult males in the household. So if you have more than 1 adult male in the household, it's quite likely that you will have a migrant, right? While if you have only 1, as I was mentioning before, it's mostly males who are migrants in this context. So if you have only 1, it's very unlikely that this person will be a migrant, because then it's very risky for the family back home to be in this situation. So yeah, that's the first instrument, and the second instrument is using for each oblast in Russia the wage over time, the average wage in this oblast, weighted by the share of Tajikistani migrants in each of the oblasts, right? So that's the municipality weighted average. I just put this map quickly just to say I look at the share per district. So even if I put regional fixed effects, so basically I have 5 regions here, I will still have some variation within, so my instrument will still catch something within the region because there are several districts. So that's these results. They are slightly different than the IV estimation, but pretty similar. The takeaway is the same. And arguably, this instrument is exogenous because we understand that the laws of in terms of migration, etc., are federal. They are not at the regional level. So it's unlikely to impact directly the wages within the country in each oblast. Yeah, so putting these 2 instruments into the first stage, sorry, into the first stage, we can see that both of them are highly significant, and hence we don't fear too much the weak instrument issue. Again, the first stage is about remittances in the value. It's not a 0-1, it's not a binary. Are you remitting or are you not remitting? I put the value, but I also put the binary. When I put the value, actually, it's a bit more worrying. I'm still above the thresholds in terms of weak instruments, but I'm closer to the threshold than when it's binary. When it's binary, it's even clearer, meaning that I catch well the fact that there is a migrant or the fact that there is a remitter, but these instruments do not really catch well the value that is sent. Okay, so that's a bit of a drawback. Okay, now the last question to make sure that the estimation is fine is the selection issue. As I was mentioning, some households self-select themselves to have a migrant or not to have a migrant. Actually, a surprise that I had when I started working on this is the answer is, in this context, there might not be selection actually. So I used the Heckman inverse mix ratio specification, and I use it for the fixed effects estimation. So it's a paper they wrote in 2014, I think, and there is absolutely nothing significant when we look at the interaction terms between the inverse mix ratio and the year, you can see that for each of the specifications, there is literally nothing significant. And then I also use the control function approach that is proposed by Mutashas, Veli, and Woodridge. And here I can show you, because I think it's important, what is meaningful are the two last lines here. So we can see that there is sometimes some significant coefficient. Most of the time, the joint test is insignificant, but where it is where it is very significant is for energy. Education a bit as well, but mostly for energy. And this is why I will not interpret the energy directly, because the coefficients estimated might suffer from selection. And you can see when I look at this that the remittances using the control function approach for energy is not significant. And you will see later that for my my baseline specification, it will be significant. But then from this control function, I get a bit cautious and I'm like, okay, it might be, but just driven by the selection. All right. So same specification than before, but then now this component is estimated, right? That's the only difference that I have. And when I look at the results, now I'm more interested into the remittances. These lines are actually quite similar than what we had in the fixed effects, so we already discussed them. And what we see is fundamentally there are only two categories that are changing with remittances. Is the energy, but I just discussed it. The energy is to be taken cautiously because it might suffer from selection, and the secondary goods. So we can see that secondary goods are increasing with remittances in terms of the share that is spent in the household. Interestingly, food is not significant anymore while it was with the classic fixed effect. So remittances might not be, after all, to throw out poverty, because the basic and the food and health as well in this food specification are not significant, but the secondary are. So that's really the takeaway. There is only this type of goods that are increasing systematically in household receiving remittances. Now, if I want to look at the magnitude, because here before I just look at the economics, the statistical significance. If I want to look at the magnitude, what I can do is to compute the marginal shares. And here I will put the hypothesis that the expenditures are the local income plus the remittances. Given that in the data I have less than 5% of the households with a bank account, it's quite likely that remittances are spent really quickly, meaning that this estimation might not be too unrealistic. And then when I compute the marginal shares for both, what is interesting is to compare. When I get an extra sum of money, how much of each of the goods I will spend more, how much more, sorry, I will spend. And when I look at what is put in bold here, it's really education, health, and secondary goods that are increasing the most in terms of relative terms, right? Energy is decreasing, consumption is pretty stable, etc. So that's really the key takeaway. In terms of economic magnitude, education and secondary goods, health are all spent much more with remittances, but then these results are quite imprecise except for secondary goods. Right, then I have further results. I look at different things. An important result is that when I put the lag of remittances, so the remittances, the period before, so in 2007, when I look at 2009, 2009, when I look at 2011, well, I can see that there is no effect of past remittances on the consumption shares, meaning that it's really a very temporary effect. I spend more right now, but in 2 years, I will be back to normal somehow. So it's also in line with the fact that the remittances might be spent more in conspicuousness rather than in long-term investments such as education. And a last point is that the longer the migration, the less the change in consumption share, the lower the change in consumption share, meaning that it's also, once I have a migrant, the first remittances, the first flows of remittances will be spent in this aspect. But then if the migrant stays longer, the strategy will be different, right? So yeah, that's about it. I think I've consumed my time. Just to briefly wrap up, the PCS sorting is important because it allows to split the goods, the durable, the non-durable goods, and it allows to split it without suffering from cultural biases or cultural ignorance, which is my case. In the Tajikistani migration in the data in this period, selection doesn't appear to be a problem, surprisingly. And remittances lead to more conspicuous consumption. So we also understand that remittances and local income are not spent similarly. And in a way, my claim is to potentially target better the way remittances are spent. And I leave you with Thorsten Veblen quotes because it's a great economist.
Thank you very much, Rémi, for the great presentation. So does anyone from the audience have any questions to Rémi or maybe some suggestions, especially if you come from Tajikistan and maybe there are some things that Rémi should know about? The floor is open for you. So in the meantime, until people get inspired and come up with some questions, maybe I have some question to you. So what I noticed when you're using your second instrument for the municipality weighted wages, so what I found really interesting, so you do actually know where the migrants go. So is there like a question in the questionnaire where they ask them to which oblast and municipality? Oh, okay. So I thought that was great to be able to use that information and to really weight by the shares of the Tajikistani. And then another interesting thing that I thought was when you said at the beginning, there is a shift in the share of expenditures from food to energy. And I think I found it very curious. Is there anything in the literature or are there any ideas like what could be responsible for that, like what's happening? And it's really interesting how it's always a little bit different with the energy, right, in your results.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's good you spotted that because indeed this is something a bit complicated for me. So if everyone has some ideas, that would be fantastic. My guess, that's really a rough guess, is that I mean, Tajikistan is, as I was mentioning, one of the poorest countries in Central Asia, but it's growing. You know, like at least at that time was growing. So when it grows, when the economy grows, technically the share of consumption in food tends to decline. And then you go, you know, you first take the most basic, the most important, okay, food. Then once I have that, maybe in a, you know, like my guess is it's a bit like these steps. And one more thing is, I fear that for energy, there is a huge discrepancy over the country. For instance, you have quite a rich literature about the Pamir region in Tajikistan, where there is a huge shortage of energy, and people have to really like technically they don't even spend anything in energy because they pick the trees, you know, they pick woods, timber around this area. Pamir region is not a big region, you know, it's only a small subset of the households in the survey. But maybe there is something in terms of heterogeneity within the country, because the access to energy is quite different over the territory.
Okay, thank you very much, Rémi. Is there anyone maybe who has a question or would like to contribute to this discussion? Yes, Safdar, please.
Thank you very much, Rémi, for your interesting and informative presentation. I was wondering that the patrons that migrants send back their money through, like not all of the migrants send money on monthly basis, right? Some remit like once in a year or twice in a year. Do you think that the pattern that using which they send money affects the consumption patterns, something like that?
Yeah, well, that is a great question. To be honest, I need to verify this because if I need to make sure, because to me, the question was how much of remittances did you receive last year? It's not just a month. But I think for at least some waves, all the waves do not have the same questions necessarily, especially for the remittances. I need to verify whether there is an information about how frequently or how many times have you received something. Because I agree with you, this is a great comment, because indeed, if I receive more in one shot or a little bit all the time, it's very different in terms of how I can smooth the consumption from the remittance stream that is coming to my household. I think if I haven't done it, it's because I couldn't. So I fear that I don't have the information in the data, because this is really a great comment, and I think it crossed my mind on the way of the paper, of the writing of the paper. But thank you for that. I will check again.
Thank you. And I also see that Zebo has a question. Zebo, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, it's not just a question, it's just a quite feedback. Hello, my name is Zebo and I'm coming from Tajikistan. And it was really interesting for me to hear about this research. There are many things that I didn't know even being in Tajikistan, especially the part that of your conclusion that you said that remittances and the earned income are spent differently. Like, is there any frequency on how frequent the remittances are sent? Is it every month? Because the income in Tajikistan is like, they receive it every month. So the consumption is also based on that. And is there any data which says how frequent remittances are sent to Tajikistan and how it's spent? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think what you ask is in line with the previous question. So again, I will double check. I don't think there is, because that would be fantastic to have this, because it's really what something that I didn't mention after all in this paper, but something I had in mind all the way I was on the research, is the permanent income hypothesis, where, you know, like the people are really smoothing their consumption, because there is like the income is composed of a trend and a stochastic component somehow. You know, there is something that is secure, there is something that is not secure. And to me, the not secured might be remittances, especially when it's spent, when it's sent very erratically, like once per year, a bit randomly, and, you know, the family wasn't sure they were going to receive it, and they are not sure they are going to, and they are not sure how much they are going to receive, which is also another problem. Yeah, I don't think I have this information, unfortunately. But it's good. Maybe I can ask a question myself to you, because in the context of Tajikistan, in the data I had like 10 years ago, really the banking rate, the number of people having a bank account was super low. And do you think it's realistic that only you know, like 3 or 4% of the population has or had a bank account at that time? Or is it because it's mostly in the rural area that people do not have a bank account, and in urban people do?
So is there anyone who is familiar with the local context that could maybe help Rémi in answering that question?
Yes, so in rural areas, as you know, we don't have much developed industry and also banks, but now I think it changed in according to 10 years ago, because before the transfer was sent like with transfer payments by cash and things like this, but now it has developed, and the online system and the agreement with banks between Russia and Tajikistan have developed. And I think for now, the more people have a bank account, especially comparing even with 5 years ago, now it's easier just to send from Russia to Tajik bank account online without any going to the bank, receiving and things like this. But in rural area, it's still a problem. But in big cities like Dushanbe, Khujand, and Pamir also, it's not a problem anymore. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zebo. And I really like how we use this platform, not just to answer the questions, but also to ask questions and get feedback. And I think we have maybe time for the last small question, if anyone has. So I think there are, okay, Elisa, please.
Hi all. So I just want to say one thing, as maybe it will help Rémi. So I'm a PhD and also doing some research on Central Asia. And I face the same problems as Rémi when I start my research, actually. 4 years ago, we started a new project, Transition from Medication to Work in the Caucasus and Central Asia. And we did survey in Tajikistan, and you can find, but it's youth survey means we took the aged 18, 35. So it's actually what we figured out. It's also when young people mostly travel to Russia and Kazakhstan for work, so labor migration. So in this context, it might help you a lot. And it was done 2018, we did the survey. And yeah, and we asked actually about banking account if they have, and so on, because about the wage we couldn't ask. And remittance was a big issue in Tajikistan, so we included entire topic on that.
Okay.
So also that what actually explains Rémi's suggestions why now it's not food the first target that remittance are spent on, if not the secondary goods, as you know. What we figured out was we did, I mean, even a small qualitative study, and they must say that they travel, I mean, they go to work to Russia targetedly. So it means target oriented, you know, it's like they don't say, okay, I have to go to Russia and earn some money and then for some food for the family. No, it's like there should be something bigger in order to go to the Russia, for example, marriage, it's housing, and so on, you know, that's, and there's no really kind of long-term planning. Okay, I go to Russia and I will try to build the life there, for example, or study and then, you know, make a career. No, it's just, you know, it's like next year I'm going to marry, and what I do is going to Russia, earn enough money for marrying, I will come, I will marry, and then we will see how life, you know, later on. And this is very interesting. Yeah, so
I'm
that's
very sorry.
Just maybe.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to interrupt. I'm just afraid that we're running out of time. So what I would suggest, if you could exchange your emails privately, maybe, and then maybe if you could continue the discussion, it would be great. I think beneficial for both of you. So now I think it's a good time that we move to the third speaker. So the third speaker is Safdar Jan with his research on the impact of remittances on household decisions to engage in tertiary level education, evidence from Kyrgyzstan. Safdar is an inaugural graduate from the University of Central Asia. He's from Pakistan and currently working as a visiting teaching assistant at the University of Central Asia. His research is about the effect of remittances on tertiary education, and he used Kyrgyzstan as a case study. And the floor is yours, Safdar. You may start sharing your screen.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah, I'll be sharing my screen in a while now. Hello and good afternoon. I'm Safdar Jan from northern Pakistan. I have recently graduated from the University of Central Asia, and I have completed my bachelor's in economics. So as part of my thesis project, I conducted a research on the effect of remittances on decisions to pursue tertiary education in Kyrgyzstan. So this research was supervised by Dr. Yormizayov and co-supervised by Dr. Christopher. And before going to thank the LiK conference organizers for letting me present my things in this platform. So can you the slide please? here is the outline I will be covering in this presentation. I'll talk about the motivation and background this research, and then move to I'll talk about literature, and I'll talk about research questions, and then I move to data methodology, and I'll be talking about the findings of this research. Okay, as we know that remittance play a vital role in the development of and with globalization and migration, the effect has become even more important because more and more people are able to move across the countries to work and send back money to their families. Remittances are active because they have this household feature. So there is no government or immediate institution. So people work abroad and they send back the money. The household then consume money, and it is like very important to study how they consume. In previous presentation, Rémi, he pointed out micro effects, and that's very informative as well. So I'll talk about the effect of this on education, and in my research is like on the effect of tertiary education or high level education.
Safdar, I'm sorry, could you try maybe turning off your camera so that probably your connection gets better and we can hear you better, because otherwise the sound is a little bit difficult to understand at times.
Okay. How about now? I've turned on.
Yeah, so far it looks a little bit better. We'll see.
Okay. You go to the next. Yes. So the main motivation doing this research was to study the role of remittances in the of higher education and to analyze the direct effect of remittances as well as the indirect disposable income. Here, for the disposable income, remittances are the force that increase the income of a household. And if a household is, and it is very important to study that what is the role, how they are using disposable in their household matters. I'll be talking about the effect of migration with the gender, so higher education if they belong to remittance recipient household or not. If we talk about tertiary education in Kyrgyzstan, it is comparatively expensive than secondary or primary education. Usually primary education is free in Kyrgyzstan. So again, the one here is there are studies that that talk about the effect of remittances on education of their children or some level, but apply those results to tertiary level education because tertiary level education is comparatively expensive than secondary. So next, please. Next, Kyrgyzstan and about some from Asian Development and World Bank. We can see 6% are enrolled as compared to 37%. So the female enrollment in tertiary education is higher than the male counterpart. And according to World Bank, the gender parity index of tertiary level is 1.23, which means that if 10 males are in a education, 12 males are also in education, means the ratio is 12 to 10. Second most important point is the dependency on 28 of Kyrgyz GDP is composed of, so over dependence on remittances means more people are directly dependent on the money that migrants send back to their home country. Just if you take a look at the larger picture on migration, we can see that 96% of remittances come from Russia, and majority are like blue collar workers. So this is the country profile of Kyrgyzstan. I think that makes it interesting to study the effect on education. Can you move to the next slide, please? So here a brief overview of remittance flow in Kyrgyzstan over the years. We can see as we move from 2002 towards 2018, the rate or the remittance volume increases over time. And in 2019, it was recorded to be $2.4 billion, which was like almost 30%, approximately 30% of the Kyrgyzstan's GDP. So if we look at the theoretical literature, we can see there are like the effect of remittances on education is not quite clear. There is this standard economic theory that talks about remittance flow can relax the financial constraints of the households and boost investments in education. So it sees remittances as a factor that increases overall household disposable income. Therefore, if a household has more income, they are more likely to spend on long-term human capital. The other theory about large-scale migration, which is we can also connect it with remittances, is the macroeconomic theory of large-scale migration. It says that large-scale migration causes the wages in the home country to increase, and therefore it attracts young workers within the country to quit education and start working. Like it is one of the effects, because it you know, the household members in the family of the migrant, if they receive more wages in their own country, then they are more likely to quit schooling. This happens because most of the migrants, they don't start working right after reaching a country. It takes time to find a job and start sending remittances back home. Again, like shortages. This one is another. It talks the absenteeism of members. So if a household member is absent, then the responsibilities are shared by the remaining household members. So sometimes they have to quit education to fulfill those requirements. Again, this is one of the effects. Theoretically, it has been written down. Well, one of the effects of remittances. Can you move to the next slide, please? Okay, what I see the gap in research related to Kyrgyzstan is that Dolatov talked about the schooling of children left behind. You know, remittances and schooling of children left behind are uncorrelated. It was his result. And Kreuger and Anderson, they also talk about general household welfare, I would say, and they also talk about the effect mostly on children left behind or general household welfare. But as I said previously, that there is not much research about the effect of remittances on pursuing higher education in Kyrgyzstan. Okay, next slide, please. So the main research question of my study was, do remittance affect household decisions to pursue tertiary education and invest in long-term human capital? I used the fifth wave of LiK, and this is the general picture of the data that I used for my empirical analysis. There were 1,105 respondents. Out of them, 293 were male and 812 were female, and 730 were from rural areas and 375 were from urban areas. and 554 were actually enrolled in university, and 561 were not enrolled. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so this is the distribution of enrollments. Out of those 1,105 respondents, 169 household or the respondents were actually receiving remittances. Out of those, 92 enrolled, 77 were not enrolled, and 936 were not receiving remittances. And out of them, 452 were enrolled and 484 were not enrolled. Next slide, please. So I was following these hypotheses. So along with the standard economics theory, my main hypothesis was remittance flow should increase the investments on tertiary education. And as in the previous presentation, Rémi said that remittances from the poor household and the richer household have a different kind of effect. So I was also interested in looking at poor households. Are they more likely to spend on remittances on short-term needs or long-term needs? So I used multivariate binary logistic regression, and then I performed the preliminary tests for assumptions like linearity, multicollinearity, and then I used Hosmer-Lemeshow test and confusion matrix to check the goodness of fit, or to check the prediction accuracy of my model. Next slide, please. So this was the model. These were my variables. Remit is the volume of remittances. remit is actually if a binary variable, which is actually if a household receives remittances, it takes a value of 1, and if the household does not receive remittances, it takes a value of 0. Then I add other variables as well. Age, residence is also another variable, urban, rural, and then I add like regional dummies. Next slide, please. So the goodness of fit, the upper box talks about the Hosmer-Lemeshow test, which actually the null hypothesis of this one is like the predicted values and the actual values, they are not statistically different. So failing to reject the null hypothesis means the model has a good prediction ability. And again, here the confusion matrix shows that 71% of the values were predicted correctly by the model, which shows that the model is good to use. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so here are the main results. I will discuss more in the next slide, but if we look at the main variables here, there is remit, which is if a household receives remittances or not. It is statistically significant at 95% confidence interval, and these are actually the marginal effects. So we can see here that if an individual belonging to a remittance recipient household has 14% more chances of pursuing higher education than an individual who does not, taking all else constant. So this is a very important, I think, finding that this research offers. And another important thing is, if we look at the remit variable here, remit is actually the volume of remittances, and it is very small and it has a negative sign. So it suggests that although it's statistically insignificant, but the volume of remittances are not correlated with the decisions to pursue higher education. So here I just want to clarify that a household, as I asked Rémi about the patterns of remitting, this results shows that household if they receive remittances, like obviously their income level increases, but it is not clear that do they really spend the money from remittances on the human capital or not. So although if households receive remittances, it boosts their confidence to spend more on human capital in general, but it is not really it is not actually proven through this research that the money that they spend on education or tertiary education actually comes from the amount of remittances that migrants send back home. And if we talk about the age here, age is you can see it is statistically significant, highly significant, and it says that 1 year, if an individual gets older by 1 year, the probability of getting enrolled in a tertiary educational setting decreases by 11%. That is also very important. Can you move to the next slide, please? Yeah, so the main conclusion here are that there are actually two effects of remittances on tertiary education. And of course, I just didn't mention that the sample that I use here is composed of individuals who are aged between 18 and 25. 18 and 25 is considered to be the average age across the world where individuals are enrolled at a tertiary level education. So that's why I used only those individuals from households, and I have found that there is a significant positive between remittance recipient households. There is an insignificant relationship between the remittance. So from that we can conclude that remittance money primarily in the poor households primarily goes to short-term asset accumulation, not like long-term investments on education. Next slide, please. Can you? Yes. So the three main focal points of my research was to answer these three questions that are: does to a remittance recipient household increase the probability of getting tertiary education? And the answer to the question is yes. It increases the probability with the marginal effect of 14%. So I explained in the previous slide that the households that receive remittances usually have they are more likely to spend their the money from their disposable income, not necessarily from their remittance, the remittance amount on higher level educations. And talking about the gender, are females more likely to pursue tertiary education than males? And the research found that yes, females on average are more likely to enroll in tertiary education, and males on average 8.9% less likely to pursue tertiary education as compared to females. It is, I guess, the primary reason for this one is that the migrants who actually migrate are usually males, and the household members who are left behind are actually like females, and they actually go to university. If there is a male in the household, they can also go to pursue tertiary education, but there are other they are the ones who usually take the responsibility of a person who is missing or who has migrated. And the point was volume of decisions to pursue higher research found that the volume of decisions to pursue higher education. So yeah, again, it is not clear from the research that the money that they spend on higher education is actually comes from the amount that remittances, not from next slide, please. Yeah, so the limitations of this research was that I did not consider the parental education or family background on decisions to migrate here, because I am specifically looking at the effects of remittances after the action has been done. So of course there are like effects of family education or effects of parental education on the decisions to migrate or to attend tertiary education. So my research does not account for this one. Another is like I did not account for, in my research, I did not account for the quality of education, because usually the individuals who go to universities, or they can go to private university or public university, or sometimes they can go abroad to study, but I really looked at if they are enrolled or not. So if an individual is not enrolled in a university, it means that he or she are not getting education. So I just focused on whether an individual enrolled in university or not, and I just found the relationship between this decision to the flow of remittances.
Okay, Safdar, I'm afraid that we have to finish maybe.
Yeah, I'm done. I'm done. This is the last slide. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay.
If you have questions, then you can
Thank
ask.
you very much, Safdar. And so we ran a bit late because of the technical problem. So that's why I counted the time later when Safdar was starting. So does anyone from the audience have any questions to Safdar? If you do, you may write in the chat, or you may raise your hand, virtual or physical. Maybe in the meantime, I can ask my question that I have. So when you were presenting the marginal effects, at what values were you evaluating those? Was it for the mean values of independent variables, or what values?
It was for the mean values, not for individual values. So this is at the mean value. The marginal effects are at the mean value.
Okay, thank you very much. That makes it clearer. And then another question that I had was, in one of your slides, you were mentioning about like the distribution across genders, across rural and urban, and there was a very high percentage of females in relation to males. And there I was a little confused. Was it referring to the proportion of women who were in migration, or was it the proportion of women who were receiving tertiary education? I think that's where I got confused.
You mean the number, like there were actually 1,105. So let me go back. So I chose the sample, I chose only individuals from 18 to 25, right? And I chose their households. So their households might be receiving remittance. So of those 1,105 responses, majority of them are females, and males are like maybe 30% or something. So this is just the distribution of the respondents of from the LiK dataset that I used in my research.
I see. Okay, thank you very much for the clarification.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions or suggestions? I see Rémi. Yes, please.
Well, so I might have missed some bits, so I apologize if so, because what I fear from the presentation, I mean, it's interesting, super interesting. What I fear is really the selection issue. How do you disentangle, you know, the people choosing higher education, the people choosing to have the household choosing to have one migrant, because they might really share some characteristics, and it's a bit difficult to, you know, separate these two. Maybe one idea that you can do, I don't know, you know, I don't know the data you're using, can be to check whether households with migrants had, before there was the migrants remitting, higher education as well. And you look at the difference between the propensity to have higher education before there is any migrant and the ones who are like getting in tertiary education while having a migrant. If you have a difference, then you might fear a bit less the selection issue.
That's the you know.
Sorry?
Can you repeat, please? Because we couldn't hear you, Safdar. Okay, I think maybe there was some connection issue, it seems. Okay. I think Safdar reconnected. So can you repeat the last things that you were saying, because we couldn't hear because of connection issues?
So, yeah, so Rémi mentioned a great point here. So I was like, the data that I used, I focused more on, you know, the households that are receiving remittances. Maybe there is like they have prior migrants, or they have like the migrants that they just went to other country. Let's say they just went to Russia or something. But I was like more focusing on the households they are receiving remittances or not. Did I answer your question correctly, or like I don't know, maybe I didn't understand your question.
In your data, in your model you compare households with remittances and households without remittances, right?
Yes,
that's what you're doing.
Yes.
And the households without remittances are not necessarily households with migrants, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the thing, you know. That's because maybe the fact that they get the higher education might be due to another thing than remittances.
Yes.
I just thought you can do also just compare households with migrants, but no remittances, households with migrants and remittances, right? You can also compare this.
Yeah, so the variable that is remit, it takes value 1 if the household is receiving remittances or migrants, or if they have been receiving remittances for the last 5 years. So yeah, so I gave the value 1 to that binary variable even if the migrant or the household had received remittances for the last 5 years. I didn't go further back, but I don't know if this answers your question.
Okay, thank you, Safdar. And I think we have time for the last but very small question, if anyone has. Okay, I think there are no more questions. Then in this case, we wrap up. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for the presenters, for the great presentations, for everyone who contributed to discussions. So what I suggest is, if you like the presenters, you may write your email addresses in the chat so that if anyone wants to connect with you, ask questions, give suggestions, they can contact you. If you wish not to disclose, that's fine. Otherwise, I thank you, everyone, and sorry for running a bit late. Goodbye. Have a good rest of the day.